Hey there, I thought I would do a short-ish video just talking about the differences between crochet and nail binding. I do both, I kind of switch back and forth, and I like both for different reasons, and there's some disadvantages and advantages. Hey, I'll leave that up to you. So some examples. This, for example, is nail binding. I'll do some close-up shots later. It's one of the first projects I did in Oslo stitch. So in nail binding, there are many different kinds of stitches you can use. There's a whole family that I'm more familiar with, like Oslo, Broden, others whose name escapes me right now. Corrigan is another one. So this is one of the first projects I made out of a fairly rugged looking yarn, not hand spun, not my hand spun. These also were kind of a set of a toque and then a neck warmer, but I actually did them in different stitches. This I believe is Corrigan, and I think this one is Mammon. Again, Oslo, Mammon, Corrigan, Broden, they're all kind of a similar family. I won't talk about how to nail bind so much because there's a zillion examples out there on the YouTube that you can see. Nail binding, of course, is done with a needle. Now, a needle. You can just see needle binding. I made this one out of antler. I've made wooden ones as well. And it's a through technique. So you're actually looping through previous loops with a finite length of yarn. Maybe like 6 feet, 8 feet of yarn, something like that. And so one of the biggest differences between this and like crochet and knitting is with crochet and knitting you're doing a continual length. Like you can crochet constantly off a 200-yard ball without ever stopping as long as you're not doing color changes. With nail binding you're constantly cutting lengths or snapping lengths, and then you're felting the new ends together. So when you use up your yarn, you take it off the needle, you join a new piece, you wet felt it together, you thread, and you keep on going. An advantage, of course, is if you have a hole or a fray, because it's a looped-in technique, you can pull the free ends and they'll just tighten up like knots. The whole thing won't come unraveling. Unlike, knitting or crochet, sometimes you could just get a free end and just tear the whole garment apart. So these are nail binding examples, of course. Is it faster than crochet? Well, we'll talk about that in a sec. Here's some crochet. So again, a zillion crochet videos out there. It's done with a hook, all of different sizes. These are fingerless gloves I made, and they have a ribbing, and they're all like single crochet because I like the denseness of single crochet. Double, triple crochet, they tend let a lot of air through, so they're not the warmest things, especially in a breeze. Where a single crochet, I just like the tightness of it, and the fact that it kind of, for me, keeps me a bit more warm. In crochet, you tend to mix stitches, like for ribbing, or you can change textures within projects, you can do cabling, stuff like that. Whereas nail binding, it tends to be a stitch that you do for like the whole project. They both produce somewhat stretchy fabric, probably nail binding a little bit more as I'm pulling on the crochet here, not moving a lot. Where on the nail binding, it's got a bit more, not tons. And the nail binding tends to be quite stretchy the wrong way, if you will. Where crochet is pretty uniform, and I guess it's more stretchy the long way too. So I made these crochet fingerless gloves, and right now I'm working on basically kind of a cowl thing, keep my ears cold in winter. I bought crochet hooks. Some people make them, but generally you don't hear of that so much. Where in nail binding, people making their own nails or needles or buying ones that other people have made is much more a common thing. I like the archaeological aspect of textiles, so that's what attracts me to nail binding. It's been around for thousands of years more than crochet. Crochet is a relatively speaking recent invention, last few hundred years at most, where nail binding, you're talking a history of thousands of years. In both cases, I like working with hand-spun yarn, my own hand-spun if I can do it, just because I like the earthy kind of handmade quality of it. I like the sort of connection of being involved in the process of, taking the fleece off the sheep and then getting from that to a finished product. It really attracts me. You can now bind with like acrylic instead of wool or cotton. The problem is you can't wet splice acrylic, it just doesn't work. So you end up having to use, at worst cases like knots, which would leave a big kind of bulge, and it's difficult when you're threading a knot through in the last little bit of length. You can do things like a Russian join, which somewhat hide the knot, but it's not ideal. It's a little better suited to, if you're now binding, to use real wool. So now let's take a close-up look at some of the tools and what the fabric looks like close-up. Okay, so as promised, here's some close-ups of some of the tools involved. So this is now binding. So I've made all these needles. I get a charge out of making my own needles, either out of wood. I think this is a walnut, zebra wood, and both of these are different parts of antler, naturally shed antler from deer. That I've carved and made needles out of. The nice thing about antler, it has a bit of often a curve to it, not too many straight sections, and that curve can actually be used a little bit to help your technique. So now binding needles, you're not going to find them in stores. You can use like a tapestry needle or something like that, but I don't know, the thickness helps a bit with loop consistency and stuff, and they just look cooler and feel cooler because they're kind of like historical. Crochet, of course. These are commercial hooks that I bought, and I went and sewed myself a nice little suite of different sizes of hooks, which of course you use depending on the thickness of your yarn and how tight you want your loops and stuff. Like I said, I've seen some examples of handmade crochet hooks, pretty cool. I would imagine the hook part is delicate, and it's difficult to make that out of wood and not have it cause you problems. I haven't tried yet, doesn't mean it can't be done. And some close-up of the fabric. So again, here we go, 3 examples of stitches in nail binding. Oslo, which is kind of one of the simpler stitches that people start out with. It's a little bit, you can see light through it, so I haven't done it super tight. It has not bad elasticity, Oslo, because I think there's lots of airspace between the yarn. Oslo stitch. This one is, the neck warmer is done in Broden, which is kind of in the same stitch family. Color changes don't work so great in nail binding. It's always a spiral technique. You can work nail binding flat, but the turning at the edges when you go back and forth isn't really, there's not a hard and fast good way of doing it to make a nice clean edge. That's an advantage crochet has. So you tend to always work in the round and always work in spirals. And of course the problem with spirals, if you're going to do color changes, they're quite apparent. Design feature, defect, I don't know. You get used to it, but it kind of bothers me a little bit sometimes. And of course this toque. Here again you can see all the color changes, which I did. I wear those in the back so it doesn't show. Different stitch, I think this is either Corrigan or Mammon, I can't remember. It just has a little bit of different characteristics, right? The other one, the Broden, ends up with these nice little ridges, where Mammon tends to be a lot smoother. The splices don't really show up. If you do them well, and rub them, they're not too much thicker or thinner than the surrounding yarn. They just kind of bury themselves. Anyway, now binding examples. Crochet examples. Again, these were done with single crochet and just a variance where I did some around the post to get a ribbing effect. Nice tight even stitch. The stitches are smaller certainly, so when people do speed comparisons, crochet now binding so slow because you're threading through and pulling a long way and stuff. Now binding stitch in this case, for example, has about the same height as 2, almost 3 rows of single crochet. So even though each movement of the stitch takes longer, they build up quite a bit faster, and it's still like a very dense stitch. You're not just building up with airspace, you're building up with a lot of yarn. So fingerless gloves that I made, I really like them. They turned out good. I'll probably do mitts. And right now, of course, I'm working on a, like I said, a pullover cowl. Again, all done in single crochet. The other cool thing crochet does is people will make animals like amigurumi. I can never pronounce it right. But I've done a little bit of like animal shapes, little toys and nail binding. It can be done. It's just not like super well suited to it. But there you go. I'm using, of course, hand spun in this case, yarn that I've spun. I'm just really attracted to the texture and the earthy look of hand spun. In this case it's undyed. Different sheet, hence the color change, which I find really cool. But that's me. You can crochet of course with acrylic because you don't have splices all the time. Acrylic and now binding, not as nice to work with because joins, Russian joins, are somewhat invisible, but they're still a little bit bulky. Pain in the butt. That's it. That's my quick overview of crochet versus now binding. I like both for different reasons. I definitely like doing both with hand spun. You can do that. It's kind of up to you what you want to do. Try them both. Now binding's really cool. Less common than crochet, but neat historical, archaeological aspect if that appeals to you. Crochet, both of them are single needles. Knitting and me don't get along, so I like the single tool kind of aspect of it. Easier to recover from errors in both cases. Anyway, that's my short little vid.